the question of whether or not the hashtag online left does enough to appeal to hashtag men has become the question du jour. And like, that's a very misguided question, in my opinion.
Thought Slime is one of the worst. I saw his video about Maniac Cop and then I made the mistake of watching some more. So I know his position on these issues pretty well.
Broadly speaking, the goal of the left should be to spread power to the most people possible. And so it should always be kind of harder to get...
Wait.
If the aim is to spread power to as many people as possible, then there's a lot of people out there who are men who you could perhaps spread some power to.
Spread power? Before we spread power, we need numbers, right?
I mean, Vaush is technically correct here. He's tactically correct. It is good to try and get support for your movement, but that's not really the issue here. The issue is that Thought Slime sees men as an oppressive group rather than an oppressed group.
Get people who already have unfair amounts of power on board. That's inconvenient, but it's also kind of unavoidable without diluting the goals we seek to achieve. It is never in the self-interest of the powerful to aid the powerless. That's the reason there are
Freedom Riders. There are Freedom Riders, people from a privileged group who nonetheless supported an oppressed group. Historically, if you really want to support oppressed people, then yeah, you should be reaching out to other groups to get their support as well. Also, Thought Slime is a white guy. I mean, okay, I know he's non-binary and I can see he's wearing a lot of makeup there, but he is definitely a white guy and he's definitely perceived by everyone else as a white guy, so gotta ask why he thinks this doesn't apply to him.
Are powerful and powerless people in the first place. And men, by and large, are more powerful than women.
Wait, how long does this go on?
Well, I don't know about men who are by and large, but the average man doesn't really have a lot of power, and certainly doesn't have more power than the women in his life. You can see from the statistics the sort of negative life outcomes that men have, and that's why this argument is normally focusing on just a few men at the top, you know, or most politicians are men, or most CEOs are men, or whatever. I've never actually seen someone stupid enough to just say, by and large, men have more power before.
Also, keep in mind that men being more socially powerful than women does not translate to every guy feeling like he's part of a superior social class than women. For instance, if you're a guy and you're in high school, you might actually feel the opposite in a lot of cases.
Yeah, or if you're a guy who's in prison, or in poverty, or homeless, or trying to get help after being a victim of a crime, or a sex crime, or trying to get a space in a domestic violence shelter, getting divorced, trying to obtain child custody, visitation, access rights, so on and so on. Almost like men aren't actually more powerful than women at all, you know?
Men have most of the money, authority, and do most of the murdering and assaulting, often to not men.
Authority is a nice vague term that I can't easily quantify. On the other hand, money, well no, women control most consumer spending, have most individual wealth, are more likely to have their own homes. When they own their own home, on average own larger homes, are less likely to still live with their parents in their 20s, and so on. And yeah, men do most of the crime. That's not a sign of privilege, that's quite the opposite, in fact. Just like with black people, poor people, and other disadvantaged groups. And yes, they do sometimes do those crimes to non-men. But far more likely to men. Men are far more likely to be victims of basically every category of violent crime.
In virtually any circumstance where a man has a shitty time in life, if that man were a woman, they would be having a worse time.
Except for family courts and criminal courts and healthcare and the education system and retirement and... I don't really feel like doing the entire list every single time, but you know what's on the list. In fact, I'd say it's basically the other way around. There are rarely situations where a man actually has it better than a woman in the same situation. But let's see what Vaush has got to say about that.
Because they'd have all of their regular problems, plus some new woman problems.
This is not necessarily true, because a lot of guys who are having problems have problems in interpersonal situations where men are not necessarily privileged.
I mean, yeah, technically true. But also, a lot of men have problems in healthcare and education and civil and criminal court and the rest of the list. That's not interpersonal. Talking about interpersonal issues is just trying to distract from the really big systemic issues.
Men aren't really privileged in their ability to make friends or find relationships. If their problem is that they're like super poor, then that can't necessarily be fixed by being a woman. Though women are more likely to be able to not go homeless because there are more women's shelters and women are considered less threatening. So possible acquaintances might be more willing to let them sleep over at a place. But, you know, that's kind of an edge case thing. Obviously, women also have their own specific issues, but, you know, it's complicated, you know? Yeah, it's complicated.
I noticed he couldn't actually come up with any issues that women have. Like, he's right about the poverty and the homelessness and that sort of thing. Those are special issues for men. But for women, it's like, there are issues that women have. Doesn't seem to have much of a list, though, does he?
Pointing out that this is unfair is always going to ruffle some feathers. It's going to make some men very mad because they like having all of the stuff they don't deserve. They don't care.
Okay, so right off the bat, this right here is unironic, like anti-progressive propaganda masquerading as like honest, straightforward political analysis. We're not talking about taking anything from guys. You don't have to take anything from them. They're not going to lose anything. This is like the argument they make. It's like, well, did you know by elevating black people, you're actually hurting white people?
I'm always annoyed by this argument that there's no zero sums here, you know, that taking away from one, giving to another, that's not necessarily something that goes together. But the reality is a little bit different, isn't it? Because there's a certain amount of funding, there's a certain amount of activism, there's a certain amount of attention that people can provide. For example, domestic violence funding, like 99% of that going to women, when women are, say, 70% of the victims of domestic homicide at most. That doesn't really seem appropriate. But there's never going to be a way to double that funding so that men can be provided with the same services. So, you either have to make it egalitarian, or you have to reduce funding for women to make it available for men. And this not a zero-sum thing is really just a way to avoid talking about that. If men aren't going to lose from feminist activism, it's only because men don't have anything to lose in the first place. No domestic violence services, no parental leave, say. But advancement of women in education has harmed men and boys in education, and something like child custody is literally a zero-sum game. Something like funding and activism is effectively a zero-sum as well.
Well, no, it's not a zero-sum game. I don't know why why will lefties say, dude, it's not a zero-sum game when they're talking like broadly, but then privately they're like, yeah, it is a zero-sum game. I don't get it. Why? You don't need to say that. Like, all I'm talking about is like appealing to men and like taking their issues seriously and uplifting them on those issues.
Yeah, but those uplift things, that requires time, it requires money, it requires effort, it requires things that feminists will always try to monopolize for themselves and their movement.
Be on our side. We shouldn't want them to be on our side because they're just going to fuck everything up, right? Like,
what? What? You don't want guys on your side if the guy wants to maintain the privileges they have. Can't we all have those privileges?
Can we all name those privileges that non-men don't have right now? I'm not going to hold my breath about it.
Not that I'm surprised that they would be like this. You know?
Our side is meant to stop those guys. It's like saying we should be trying to appeal to billionaires to fund the left. That might be convenient, but...
Yes. Oh my God, yes. A single billionaire distributing money through left-wing media channels could single-handedly undo an enormous amount of influence. One of the reasons why there are so many, like...
Well, he who pays the piper calls the tune, as the old saying goes. I don't know if you want to be paid by someone who's then going to control what you're allowed to say and control the platform you're allowed to say it on.
At this point, I am not saying that dudes are unreachable. I'm saying that there are a portion of dudes who are unreachable. They're a small minority.
Can you be a small minority while also being a demographic group that makes up about half the population and are, by and large, in that category?
But
there are a portion of all groups that are unreachable because that's just how people are, but you can still appeal to guys' interests, guys representing, you know, half the population of the planet. You can still reach out to them and try to, like, indicate to them that it's in their interest to move leftward without just doing like preachy gatekeepy bullshit.
You can, that's true. It's just, unfortunately, you have to actually recognise that those issues exist first, which Vaush is still very reluctant to do, and Thought Slime considerably more reluctant to do.
My point is that because most dudes are reachable and can be made to understand that actually sexism is bad.
Okay, so let's find ways of convincing them of that point, right? Okay, right. They can be reached. So how do you reach them? Well, then you have to think of a good way of presenting that information to them, right?
It's all just recruitment again. That's the only thing that these people seem to care about is just that, you know? Just recruitment, not about doing what's right, not about dealing with relevant issues, just trying to get men to join their anti-man group.
We therefore don't need to mollycoddle those who are too sensitive to hear that. Because chances are, if you don't like hearing that sexism is bad, if hearing that makes you not want to be cool or chill, then probably you weren't going to be useful as an ally.
Mirrors, mate. Mildred, I think his name is Mildred. He really needs to just look in a mirror, because this applies to him more than anyone. You're not going to find a load of MRAs taking a sort of pro-sexism position, but feminists like him, if the sexism is the right type of sexism, well, that's a very different matter.
Okay, this right here, this right there, that right there is the thing that shoots us in the foot every single time. If you just go up to some kid and you're like, hey, sexism is bad, you should stop being sexist, and like then they're not convinced by your epic argument.
If you're telling people not to be sexist, then you're sort of implying that they're being sexist, which is pretty insulting, and not really a good way to appeal to people.
And then you're like, oh, I guess he wasn't going to move over anyway. Then you do actually believe that men can't be reached. Like, sexism is bad isn't an argument that's obviously, that's like tautological. Sexism is a form of discrimination which is socially like conditioned to be bad. Like, even conservatives rarely say openly, I am sexist.
Have you ever encountered a feminist who says that sexism is actually only present when there's power and privilege? And they don't say that because they're against sexism. They say that because that allows them to be sexist and then to call it something else. So yeah, I suppose it's right. Vaush has actually got a point on the power of the word there.
What leads some men to believe sexism is good?
Being male feminists.
Of people being made to grapple with the unfair power they benefit from. Telling people they're special and deserve all the nice shit that they have, that's going to be an easier sell 10 times out of 10 than like saying, hey, maybe you should have less stuff and other people should have more.
Wait.
Well, that's meritocracy, right? People telling themselves that they've got what they've got because they deserve it. But here's a suggestion. Maybe women don't deserve to be 60% of university graduates. Or to get custody in basically every separation, like 7 out of 8 times. Or to have 100% of domestic violence funding. Or to get shorter sentences for the same crime. And you can certainly find feminists who will tell you that women deserve all of those things. And I'm sure that Thought Slime would be one of them.
Men would lose some aspect of male privilege, right? Okay, but materially, what do you mean when you say that?
Gonna lose those shorter life expectancies, bro.
Like in actuality, what are we talking about? Now at boardroom meetings, rather than men being picked to talk 15% more often, everyone gets picked equal amounts? That privilege? Like, really, what are we talking about here? No, I mean it. I'm looking at chat right now. I want somebody to tell me. Like, most of the stuff that feminism wants to change is preventing men from doing things that is already bad to do anyway. Like, feminism in the Me Too movement. Don't rape. Don't sexually harass people. Stop spanking the asses of your secretaries in the workplace.
Stop asking for evidence when an accusation is made. Stop suggesting that we should punish Cardi B, or Amber Heard, or Asia Argento, or Emma Roberts, or, you know, Amy Schumer, Lena Dunham, Katy Perry, Mary J. Blige. you know, the big list. I'm sure you can Google and find even more. So, losing the chance for justice, I suppose.
Like, that shit, but like, that's not men losing something they ought to have anyway, or want to have, ideally. If you walked up to a guy and you were like, hey, how would you feel about feminism if the only thing you lost was you couldn't rape your secretary? I feel like most guys, if they could get past the weirdness of the question, would be okay with that, you know?
Might come as a surprise to someone like Vaush, but actually most men don't have secretaries, and most men find it pretty difficult to get away with raping someone, even if they actually want to do that. Which generally they don't.
Male privilege is just a very nebulous thing, you know? A lot of male privilege is just not being targeted for the bad stuff that non-men get, you know?
Yeah, it's so nebulous, it's almost sort of like it doesn't exist, you know? On the other hand, you have MRAs who can give you, like, statistics and examples and things like that.
I agree it's incredibly stupid to grant the narrative of conservatism. Men are going to lose things generally, but being charitable, I think men will still lose some stuff. If there are men who are convinced they want to live like Andrew Tate, aka a pimp, that type of man would lose things.
Good luck finding a feminist in the next decade who doesn't want to talk about Andrew Tate.
Yeah, but true, but Andrew Tate's currently in jail, right? Like, that's my point. If your argument is like, okay, well, with feminism, men will lose the right to rape and traffic women sexually. It's like, okay.
And of course, that's definitely a right that men currently have.
All right. But when I think like I don't think of that as like a male privilege thing, because women can also do, like, it's illegal when women do it too. Like, it's like, so a woman could also do some big sex trafficking thing or whatever. I mean, it's not as likely to happen for a wide variety of reasons, but I'm not really thinking of that like, okay, well, this is something men are losing. I'm thinking like...
But is it illegal when women do it? Is it less likely for women to do it? I mean, Andrew Tate had his accomplices. Some of them were women. That's how he recruited. It's how Jeffrey Epstein recruited. Not just through Maxwell, but through victim offenders like Virginia Roberts. Even Harvey Weinstein had female casting directors to go out and find victims and bring them to him. Of course, none of those women were ever punished, except for Ghislaine Maxwell, but even she isn't dead. Unlike old Epstein. And you know, we could talk about rape laws that discriminate against male victims as well, but that's not strictly on topic now. So do women really do it less often? Well, I'm sure they show up less often in the statistics. Are women really going to be punished for doing it? Is it really illegal in any meaningful sense if women do it? Not really.
Maybe men will lose like a little bit of the assumed competence that they get over women, but even that's changing because women are graduating from college way more than men are. So it's possible that demographically that's like not even, I don't know. I think that feminism...
Go and find a male teacher or a male nurse or a male psychologist, if you can, which is unlikely, and ask them if they think they benefit from assumed competence.
Is a slam fucking dunk for men, personally. I really do. I do think that. I genuinely believe that. I have been a feminist for a long time now, at least like a solid decade. I have never cucked myself out to any of these pansy bitches. I have never not insulted a woman who annoyed me. I will never, ever, 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 ever feel like I have to apologize for being a guy. I'm uncucked. But none of that has anything to do with being a feminist. We're talking about like very basic social stuff, you know? I don't think I lose anything. We don't have to apologize or weaken ourselves. It's just...
Well, there were those schoolboys in Australia who were literally forced to apologise for being male, so feminism does actually make men apologise on occasion, but I'm sure Vaush doesn't do that. However, is that a slam dunk? Vaush believes that. He really believes that. But is there any actual benefit to men? Is there any slam dunk for men that he's going to give as an example? Obviously not. So yeah, Thought Slime, one of the absolute worst, and Vaush still just doing his doctrinaire feminist thing. Not much to look at there.